Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kayleigh Lines.
Lisa Cook and Stephen Myron are now colleagues. Welcome to the Tuesday edition as the Federal Reserve kicks off a two-day meeting here in Washington with a newly appointed Stephen Myron at the table and Lisa Cook still there as well, the embattled governor with the backing of a judge, even as President Trump continues his effort to have her fired. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta, who's in for Kayleigh Lines today in Washington. We thank you for being with us here on Balance of Power. Fed Day tomorrow, the big decision. Of course, a lot of noise in the air as policymakers get down to doing their work.
Wall Street's preparing for a 25 basis point cut. Donald Trump saying it needs to be way lower than that when you look at the rates picture.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the highlight is at least for these next 2 days, Myron and Cook are colleagues.
That's true enough. Even as the White House appeals the latest ruling, this thing is getting to be a little bit complicated. But the back and forth continues here. It's unlikely they'd be able to get this done with a Supreme Court ruling, I think, before this meeting is over. So that's probably the attendance at the table. But of course, the president's left the bubble. He's on his way to the UK right now, Kriti, for an important meeting that will bring him back together with the prime minister, along with the full flourish of the royal family.
Lots to discuss. I'm sure foreign policy will be on the agenda. That's been a real sticking point between the United States and the UK that have been historical allies for a very long time. But tech, very much also on the docket.
That's
Crypto,
right.
Maybe, according to some other outlets.
Yeah, we're getting some headlines on that now. Lizzy Burden is going to join us from London coming up here. Congressman Mike Haridopolos, the Republican from Florida, will be with us for an important conversation as well. So stay with us as we cover all of our bases today on Balance of Power. And that, of course, includes Wall Street. We start there as ever with Charlie Pellet. He's at World Headquarters in New York with his take on the markets. Charlie, what are you looking at?
Right now, looking at a lot of red, Joe Mathieu, ahead of the Fed decision tomorrow, 2:15 Wall Street time. Right now, though, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all declining. Lower little changed on the S&P, holding above 6,600. 6,609 right now on the S&P, down 5, drop there of under 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 91 on the Dow, decline there of 0.2%. NASDAQ Composite Index down 4 points, just about flat on the day. 10-year yield 4.02%. Spot gold up $11 the ounce, $36.90. That's a gain of 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 2%, $64.55 a barrel. And Bitcoin trading higher by 0.7%, just above 116,000. U.S. retail sales rose in August for a third month in a broad advance. Mixed picture for a lot of the retail names today. Walmart down 0.3%. Target up 1%. Macy's up 0.1%. Amazon up by 1.5%. Oracle shares higher on news that negotiations over the future of TikTok are progressing. Oracle up by 1%. And with President Trump en route to the United Kingdom, just getting word that the UK and the US are set to announce closer cooperation on crypto. That, according to the FT, we got more on that coming up right here on Balance of Power. Recapping stocks lower, S&P down 0.1%. Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. And once again, your hosts, Kriti Gupta and Joe Mathieu.
Many thanks, Charlie Pellet, live at World Headquarters in New York. He'll be back in about 20 minutes with another read on the markets here as we make our way through this Tuesday. Thank you for joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio. You can find us as well on YouTube by searching Bloomberg Business News Live. The Tuesday edition with President Trump in the air. Kriti, he's on his way to the UK for an important visit. He and the First Lady, for that matter, that will be part business and part, I guess, fetting by the royal family. He's done this once before, so it should look pretty familiar.
Really taking up that invitation. The envelope, he was very clearly handed by Keir Starmer directly from King Charles at the time. Real showmanship in that relationship. We'll see if he has something to say, though. At the departure today, he had plenty to say on that relationship. We'll see if there's more.
Well, you were there in the driveway when he left. Let's listen to Donald Trump on his way to London.
They want to see if they can refine the trade deal a little bit. We made a deal, and it's a great deal. And I'm into helping them. Our country is doing very well. We've never done this well. We're having trillions of dollars coming because of the tariffs. And they'd like to see if they could get a little bit better deal. So we'll talk to them.
President and First Lady are set to arrive this evening. The main focus of their visit is really tomorrow. They'll be at Windsor Castle, where the ceremonial welcome with the honor guard will greet them, followed by lunch with the royal family. And the president will, of course, enjoy the flyby. They're going to have the red arrows out there, along with a couple of F-35s provided by the United States. But on Thursday, he goes to Chequers to meet with the Prime Minister. And helping us put this ambitious schedule together is Lizzy Burden. Really great to have Bloomberg's TV anchor and correspondent live from London. Lizzy, what's the security going to be like? And what's the feeling on the ground?
It's already tight, Joe. We've got police in their droves here in Windsor. We're actually not at Buckingham Palace for this state visit. We're at Windsor Castle, this 11th century fortress behind me, because, as you know, this isn't Donald Trump's first state visit. It's an unprecedented second state visit to the UK. And there is much on the agenda here. As you allude to, this economic partnership seeking to be built upon after that trade deal, for which Britain really was at the front of the queue. Of course, we're enjoying lower tariffs than many of the US's other allies. We're expecting $10 billion of economic partnerships to be signed here, including on defence technology, a nuclear partnership, also efforts to bring together the financial hubs on both sides of the Atlantic. And already we've heard from Google saying that they're going to put £5 billion into artificial intelligence here in the UK, although, of course, that's really a drop in the ocean for Alphabet, but significant nonetheless for the UK. But I have to say, this could not be coming at a worse time for Keir Starmer, so it's fraught with political risk.
Well, Lizzy, the FT, as we were talking about earlier in the program, has talked about more cooperation, not just on the tech front, but on the crypto front as well. We know this is an issue that's close to the Trump administration's heart. What can the UK offer when it comes to the crypto agenda?
Well, of course, crypto crucial to the UK when it's financially. I would say that there's a difference between the UK and the US on the regulation. You know, on the Washington side, Donald Trump's personal interest in this when it comes to investing in crypto and regulatorily as well. In the UK, we've been a little more hesitant on it, including from the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey. And perhaps that's going to be something that holds back the UK, that caution. So I am sure that this is something that will come up in the conversations, not just between Starmer and Donald Trump himself, but also when the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent meets with Rachel Reeves. And of course, they're going to be round the table with many of the traditional banking heads, the likes of HSBC and Bank of America, when they're gathering in Chequers on Thursday. So there's much to be discussed, but I really have to underscore the risk here. Look, Keir Starmer's government has lost 3 in just the past 2 weeks, including the UK ambassador to Washington, Peter Mandelson, over his links to Jeffrey Epstein, and this comes down to a Bloomberg scoop. It is going to be absolutely painful, not just in the room between the two of them, but possibly in a press conference that we're expecting at the end of this visit, if, for example, Starmer is asked, do you believe that somebody with links to Epstein should not be in high office? There is that. There is the crypto question. There is the question of Palestine as well. Starmer looking to recognise Palestine at the UN General Assembly meeting in New York next week. So above all, Starmer can't afford to look to be appeasing President Trump, who is deeply unpopular here in Britain.
It's really great to have you, Lizzy. Thank you so much for the readout, and we'll be staying in touch with Lizzy Burden over the next 48 to 72 hours as the President and First Lady make their way. By the time we're on the late edition of Balance of Power, when you join us again at 5 p.m. Eastern, we should be looking at their arrival if all things stay on time. We do have some breaking news coming from Capitol Hill, and it has to do with a potential government shutdown, or in this case, averting one. The continuing resolution that has been written up by House Republicans would keep government funding static. A continuing resolution continues the budget that's already in place until the 21st of November. That's roughly what we expected, with reporting yesterday suggesting the 20th of November would be the case. And it's a far cry from going to the end of the year and pushing everybody into a Christmas deadline, and an even further cry from the full year CR that the administration had suggested. It's a great opportunity to start our conversation with Congressman Mike Haridopolos, the Republican from Florida's 8th District, is joining us now live from Capitol Hill. And Congressman, it's great to have you with us. How do you feel about this idea? I know the Speaker presented some options to the conference this morning. Are you good keeping things where they are until November 21st?
I am. We want to make sure the government stays open. It is common sense as we're getting our economic rebound with the new bill that, of course, keeps taxes stable. We do not see a tax increase. And, of course, all the investment coming from overseas. We want to keep that momentum going. And I'm optimistic we can strike a deal. But Republicans are 100% committed to keeping the government open. We know how vital it is as we move forward.
Representative Haridopolos, some of your colleagues, I'll just name a few here, Representatives Massey, Burchett, Spartz, Davidson, even Green, have started to raise questions about this particular bill. Do you think you're going to get them across the finish line, or do you still need to appease some of the centrist Democrats that are holding out?
We're working under the assumption that Democrats simply want to shut the government down. You've heard Chuck Schumer's comments throughout the last few weeks. They want to play politics with it. We choose to keep the government open. I know that some of my colleagues in the House have some concerns, and that's always part of the internal discussion we're going to have. But that said, I'm committed to moving the government forward. I got elected to get things done. I'm happy to say that the border has been secured. And, of course, we passed the big budget bill back on July 4th, which finally offered certainty and stability to taxpayers. And another part of the process is to make sure we keep the government open as we look to lower interest rates and do other things to make sure that we stimulate this economy and send a message around the world that the United States is open for business.
Yeah, there's been some talk about maybe a longer-term conversation, Congressman. You get the CR out of the blocks, and to be able to actually get to the table with Democrats over the expiration of Affordable Care Act credits. Some have suggested that extending those might unlock a potential deal with your colleagues on the other side of the aisle. We've also seen polling, I believe it was from Tony Fabrizio, that the expiration of those credits could cause a lot of trouble for Republicans in the midterms. Where are you on that conversation now? Should that be the point of engagement with Democrats?
Well, I think more than anything else is we want to have a discussion with the American public about what this bill is and what it isn't. These credits are important to a lot of families, but we also want to make sure we have a level playing field for people who are buying insurance without the help of the federal government. So I think that will be one of the key points as we move forward. But let's be clear here. The Democrats want to shut the government down. They're in a total chaotic situation, and they think the only way to appease their base is probably to shut it down. What Mike Johnson has done as our speaker throughout the year has always been able to bring this caucus together to push some common sense forward. And, of course, the president has been leading that charge. And so I think we'll work this thing out. But, again, we have to work under the assumption, given the rhetoric from the Democrats for weeks now, that they're OK with shutting down the government. We're not. And we're going to do everything in our power in a common sense way to protect taxpayers to keep the government open.
Just to be clear, Congressman, does that mean that even though, as you mentioned, it's a key sticking point, is that's not necessarily the starting point when it comes to these discussions ahead of Thanksgiving?
Well, again, all I can say is I can't speak for others. And you know the in and out maneuvers that the Democrats have been talking about. But bottom line is they think that if you raise taxes and grow government, that somehow that's going to stimulate the economy. We happen to think differently. I always welcome conversations with the Democrats, but they need to put something up on the table. The American public was very clear last November. They wanted change in Washington. We've given them that change, and we've solved the problems on the border, and we solved the problems with the tax situation, which was very much uneasy. I mean, Bloomberg is dedicated to business, and the best thing the government can always do is offer certainty and stability to the business world. That's what we're trying to do. We hope that the Democrats don't throw in some kind of monkey wrench to mess this up.
Well, you know what, we've heard from a lot of them, and I'd love to ask you about business and the Federal Reserve meeting that's starting today, Congressman. But just lastly, we've had Democrats, including Brendan Boyle, the top Democrat on the Budget Committee, explain that their concern boiled down to not just the debate over the big, beautiful bill, but the rescissions that followed, that there's a lack of trust between the two parties because monies agreed upon and appropriated were clawed back by Republicans. Do you see them on that front? What would be your response?
Well, it's a good question to ask, but let's be clear. The Democrats were absolutely OK, given how they voted, to raising taxes. I mean, if you looked at the big bill, they were OK with going back to the old tax rates, which on average would have been a 23% tax increase. I don't think that's a good thing for the economy. As far as rescissions bills are concerned, when you look at what we cut out of there, we're talking about NPR and PBS. That is not a vital government function. Remember, when I was growing up, there might have been 3 or 4 channels, but today there are hundreds of channels. with whatever people want to see. And so we don't need to be subsidizing those programs. And it was a message that we wanted to send out.
USAID, wasn't it?
How we worked out. Oh, the USAID is even clearer to me. I'm glad you asked, Joe. I mean, if anybody looks at this in a common sense lens, they're going to say, we spent money on that when we have a budget shortfall. I thought the USAID cuts were the most obvious ones to make, and I think we need to look further. And it's one of the reasons why I created a bill that we're looking at called the Ledger Act. It says everything should be out there. You should see exactly where all of your money is being spent, not just the top line, but the specifics within. That's what we did in Florida, and we're the most transparent state in the nation, and it turned around our economy. It's the reason why Rick Scott, our U.S. Senator, and of course myself, has pushed this bill with literally 70 co-sponsors in the House. We want to make the government more transparent so we don't have these bogus expenditures like we saw with USAID.
Congressman, we've also got one eye firmly on the Federal Reserve. As Joe had mentioned earlier, I just want to play with for you some sounds, some comments that the president had made earlier when it comes to the new appointee to the FOMC board, Stephen Myron. Just take a listen.
Thank you.
He'll have a big influence on this when too late getting his rates down, I guess. Who knows? You never know with too late, but he's done a lousy job. The rates should be much lower.
What do you think about the independence?
It should be, but I think they should listen to smart people like me. I think I have a better instinct than him. If you look, all the economists got it wrong. I got it right.
The president there speaking, of course, ahead of his departure to London. Congressman, he's making the case that rates should be significantly lower. Traditionally, when we hear rhetoric like that, it means that the economy is in trouble, that we're heading for recession. Do you see any signs of that?
Well, I think we all had concerns with the latest job reports, and the president has said we've been pushing for this for months. Unfortunately, the Fed board has been giving us kind of the runaround on that. But bottom line is this. I had Mr. Powell in the committee where I serve, on the Financial Services Committee where I serve as whip, and I asked him two fundamental questions. Did they make a mistake in the Biden years on the interest rates? He admitted, yes, we made a mistake. Second, I said, did the overspending in Washington also stimulate this inflation? He said yes. So with that in mind, when other nations are cutting their interest rates, we need to do the same here. Where I live in Florida, the difference between a 7% interest rate and a 3% interest rate on an average home where I live is $1,200 a month. That's $15,000 a year, and people can't afford it. That's the inflationary effect we want to get rid of. We want to tackle inflation by doing common sense things, by reducing spending and giving certainty to the economy, by keeping the government open and making sure that people know that the tax rate is stable now and they can make those investments long term.
It's got to be an interesting day in the room, Congressman. You've got Stephen Myron, first day on the job, presumably sitting next to Lisa Cook as they hash out this decision and review the data. Do you believe Lisa Cook should be fired?
Well, I think that facts speak for themselves, and we want people who truly understand the economy. It's the reason why I'm out in the real world every day talking to people who create jobs and opportunity, not just the folks here in Washington, D.C. And as you saw in the last meeting of the Fed, there was a split vote, which is very rare, as you know. I think that given the numbers that we're seeing right now, I think there's a good chance we'll get at least a quarter point, hopefully a little bit more, to help people who've been so hard hit the last 4 years with higher rent prices and gas prices. We want to help them out, and one way to do that is to help them on their mortgage payment.
I know you mentioned the facts speaking for themselves. Do you think she deserves due process in this case before she's fired or not fired?
Well, look, we always want to provide that, but also when you apply for jobs like this, you need to be honest. And clearly that was not the case. And I think that full transparency that I talked about earlier, Joe, that idea where government spending should be in the sunshine, we need to do that. But bottom line is the Fed needs to react to the markets, and the markets start telling them reduce interest rates.
He's a man who took his doors off his own office back when he was president of the Florida Senate. Congressman, it's good to have you with us on Bloomberg. Come back and see us again. Mike Haridopolos, Florida's 8th District. Alongside Kriti Gupta, I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We'll assemble our political panel next. Rick and Jeanne are on the way in, only here on Bloomberg. As we anticipate a couple of important things in the next couple of hours in the case of Tyler Robinson, the man accused of killing Charlie Kirk. First at 2 p.m., a little more than a half an hour from now, charges will be made public. We're waiting to hear from the Utah County Attorney Jeff Gray, who is expected to appear to make the charges public and tell us a little bit more about what they have learned in the early days of this investigation. Then at 5 p.m., we're going to see the suspect via video link, Robinson, due to appear in court virtually at least for criminal proceedings that will be coinciding with the late edition of Balance of Power. So we should have our eyes on the courtroom, as I mentioned, around 5 p.m. Eastern time. Myles Miller is covering this full time for us these days, Bloomberg senior national security reporter, and joins us now live from world headquarters in New York. Myles, what are we going to learn about these charges at 2 o'clock?
Yeah, we expect to see what charges stay as part of this. Of course, they charged him with murder. They charged him with firing that firearm, and then they also charged him with obstruction. What we expect to see is that this evidence is brought forth that he is definitively linked to the gun and to the towel found at the scene of, or near the scene of, that crime. Now, Tyler Robinson, of course, the suspect in this incident, is in a special holding cell at the Utah County Jail. He's been there since Friday when he was arrested. We know that he said nothing to investigators since the moment that he was arrested. He confessed, we're told by sources, to his father, but said nothing to law enforcement. Law enforcement working off of that evidence, as well as what he said on a Discord channel he was in with more than 20 people. Kash Patel, of course, the FBI director, saying on Capitol Hill today that he expects to go through that chat and see if there are any other people who are related to this. The focus of the feds is, was there any outside influence to the shooting? And then the focus on the local end is figuring out just how he planned all of this. And we have yet to hear if there'll be federal charges in this case as well.
Myles Miller, thank you so much, live from New York, as we wait to hear the details on these charges. There's, of course, a political conversation that's being had, and it's been a pretty messy one over the past week or so, with a blame game being played by the President of the United States, and a lot of fear that we've discussed with lawmakers and with others here in our Washington studios when it comes to the next shoe to drop, the idea of retribution, the radicalization of Americans on both sides of the aisle when it comes to social media. Dick Durbin spoke to this in the hearing today with Kash Patel, the FBI director. Durbin, of course, a longtime Democrat from the state of Illinois and ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. Let's listen to what he said.
All of us in public life, on both sides of the aisle, have a responsibility to bring down the temperature and to work to unite the American people. Let's be clear. Republicans are not Nazis, and Democrats are not evil, as Mr. Patel has claimed. Democrats are not responsible for the murder of Charlie Kirk, and Republicans were not responsible for the murder of Melissa Hortman. Our political opponents are not our enemies. We are all Americans, and we should be working together to keep the American people safe and protect their constitutional rights.
You would not think that any of that would need to be said at a congressional hearing, or that it would be controversial. Let's see what our panel thinks. Rick Davis is here, Bloomberg politics contributor, Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. And in New York, Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg politics contributor, our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. It's great to see you both here. Jeanne, I'm guessing that you agreed with everything that Dick Durbin said. Is that the answer to the blame game that's been going on here in Washington? Governor Shapiro, whose home was attacked by an arsonist a couple of weeks ago, made the point yesterday publicly, not unlike Spencer Cox, that political violence on both sides must be condemned. Why do we have to say this out loud now?
Well, you know, I do agree with Senator Durbin. I would tweak it a little bit. I don't think, I understand Patel was in front of him for an oversight hearing. I don't think I would name check him like he did in that process, but I do agree. I agree with Josh Shapiro. I agree with Governor Cox from Utah. Amy Klobuchar made a similar statement during the hearing today, and that is what we need. The reason why it has to be said is because we have people in the administration, in particular, from the president on down to the vice president and so forth, who have been going public and saying they blame one side, being the left, for political violence that has been going on in the country, and that they are going to take steps to seek revenge for that and to address it. And of course, not only doesn't the data support that, it also is not what we need. There's one thing we know from the research on political violence. It's contagious. So once it starts, the way to try to bring it into control and try to mitigate it is for leaders to take offense, particularly to people on their side who engage in it. That's the way you try to get it under control. And of course, this the context we've been hearing on the podcast and elsewhere in the last 48 hours has been the exact opposite of what we need.
Rick, weigh in here. How do we get political violence under control?
I think that's a really hard question to answer. I don't think it's for lack of will, right? People generally want a safe environment to practice politics in, to have a public discourse. But we have also been imbued with this performance politics, right, where you're out there trying to get clicks, and it's less about what you're voting on that day or the policies you're pursuing than it is about how many people are clicking onto your site and or giving you a donation, all of which seems to revolve around the most hyperbolic kind of conversation that you can generate. So until fundamentally that changes, it's really hard to believe that people are going to act against their own self-interest, right? Political violence has been stoked over the years in a lot of different ways. This is not new. It brings it to focus because of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But 6 months from now, we'll be talking about something else, and we'll have not made progress. I actually think until at which point in time Congress starts holding hearings like they did 3 years ago on the pernicious impact that the internet has on young women, vulnerable communities. We were making progress then. People actually realized that the spread of these social media outlets were hurting our society. Now it seems we've forgotten all that. And I think it's a perfect opportunity for Congress to resurrect some of the good work they were doing just a few years ago.
Well, it strikes me that you can't have a cancel culture without social media, to your point, Rick. And there's been a lot of talk, Jeanne, about an emerging cancel culture, not the libs getting upset at MAGA and having them canceled for saying things that are out of date or sexist or whatever it may have been in the last iteration. Look no further than J.D. Vance, who filled in on Kirk's former podcast yesterday. He said anyone celebrating Kirk's death should be fired from their jobs, quote, call them out, and hell, call their employer, unquote. All of the major airlines have said that they have fired employees over the past couple of days for inappropriate remarks online on social media about Kirk's death. Is this the new cancel culture?
It may well be. We have seen a lot of that. And of course, those can be litigated if somebody is fired by an employer for speech that can be litigated. I think equally concerning, speaking of podcasts, was Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, on another podcast saying that they were going to address hate speech. And of course, that is clearly a violation of the First Amendment jurisprudence as it's ever been defined in this country, because the last thing most conservatives, including Charlie Kirk, were very clear on, and liberals, is that you want the government vetting what speech is appropriate and what speech isn't. But there's a lot of attacks on the First Amendment going around. Just yesterday, the president sued the New York Times. Today, speaking to Jonathan Karl, he said, maybe I'll go after you, Jonathan Karl being a really well-known reporter from ABC. So there's a lot of attempts to use the legal process to chill speech. That is very concerning. So we've got to be cognizant that when Congress does attempt, as Rick was just talking about, and hopefully they do, to find some way to regulate some of these social media sites, they do so without limiting our First Amendment rights to free speech and free press, which are critical to any democratic system. And we really, really need to be cognizant that we protect speech we don't like even more than we protect speech we do like. But there's a big difference between speech and violent acts.
Let's talk about another use for social media, at least when it comes to Kash Patel and his handling of the kind of hunt for Charlie Kirk's shooter at the time. Of course, Tyler Robinson is now the man accused. We're awaiting updates shortly. He's saying that his only crime is transparency and giving those live updates on the investigation. What did you make of that hearing?
Yeah, obviously some senators were upset about the fact that they had detained someone and claimed they had the killer in custody when they didn't. And again, I mean, that is probably more attributable to this sort of performance politics than it has anything to do with good police work. And yet, at the same time, the decision to make public the photographs and video that they had of what appeared to be the shooter was, I think, the reason that they were able to take him into custody. So it's kind of a two-edged sword, right? The same sort of performance kind of style of Kash Patel got him in trouble on the onset, but may have helped him find the killer on the downside.
You've prepared a number of elected officials and others over the years for hearings. Bring it on. Is that how you start a hearing?
That's not how I would suggest you start, but I've never sat in front of Kash Patel before and hopefully never will.
Fixing for a fight, maybe with an audience of one. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, great panel and a great conversation. Thank you both, as always. Bloomberg Politics contributors. Stay with us with much more to follow here on Balance of Power. Alongside Kriti, Gupta, I'm Joe Mathieu. This is Bloomberg. Around this time tomorrow, we'll be in special coverage, special Fed coverage with the crew in New York. And the outcome seems fairly well determined. It's a quarter point, right? Tell me if I'm wrong. The big question is the conversation that takes place in the news conference afterward, knowing that right now, just imagine, to be a fly on the wall, it is entirely possible Lisa Cook and Stephen Myron, who are in the same room, are sitting right next to each other based on the seniority that dictates everyone's position around the table. Learned that from Michael McKee earlier today. And so what will this meeting bring? And will it be justified? We're joined now by Kitty Richards, Senior Strategic Advisor at the Groundwork Collaborative, former official at the U.S. Department of the Treasury in the Biden administration. Kitty, it's always great to have you. Happy Fed Day, almost.
Thanks for having me.
I'm wondering your thoughts here, just broadly, with all of the confrontation and drama that has surrounded this meeting. They're behind closed doors now. Culturally speaking, can the Fed handle this?
I think that the Fed has been put in an unprecedented situation. That said, as you alluded to, we pretty much think we know what's going to happen with the interest rate decision. The Fed has been signaling for quite some time that they were seeing interest rate cuts on the horizon, but not yet. I think markets and the signals we've been getting from various Fed governors from across the political spectrum all point to a quarter-point rate cut. In some ways, that makes the Trump administration's really vicious targeting of Lisa Cook especially surprising and potentially counterproductive. The reason that we all think that the Fed is going to be cutting rates is that we've seen significant deterioration in the labor market. Between last month's job reports and the big revisions we saw, it looks like the labor market has been softer for longer than policymakers understood, and now we're seeing a market slowing. We're seeing job openings below the level of job seekers for the first time in several years, and we've seen a spike in the Black unemployment rate, which is both troubling for Black workers and often a harbinger of further softening in the labor market to come. And so all of those things are really pointing to the Fed loosening monetary policy to try to boost that struggling labor market. That's been made more complicated by inflation, which remains elevated and which is being driven up by the Trump administration's handling of tariff policy. But all of those things would point to a rate cut. Unfortunately, by undermining the Federal Reserve's independence in the eyes of the market, we are seeing some signs that market participants are going to start to worry that the Fed is not going to keep inflation under control. And that can be a self-fulfilling prophecy that actually makes it harder for them to lower real long-term interest rates, which can be very important.
The irony of this whole thing is that the market reaction to the very fears you've laid out is ultimately showing up on the longer term interest rate side of things, the very piece that affects the housing market, which is the very crisis that the White House is trying to warn everybody about. Does a 25 basis point or even a 50 basis point rate cut address that?
You know, that's exactly right. That what we're seeing is that yield curve is getting significantly steeper. That is, there's less and less difference between what you have to pay to borrow short term, where the market is predicting those interest rate cuts are going to come, and long term, where the long term rate is really driven by the market's expectations about future inflation. And so if what the president is trying to do is bring down mortgage interest rates, we're going to start to see whether the Fed is losing its ability to drive down those longer-term interest rates.
So what's the job for Jay Powell tomorrow? They'll make an announcement on interest rates. The markets will do what they're going to do until the news conference begins. And I suspect that everybody in the room, including Michael McKee, is going to be asking about a lot of difficult stuff that he doesn't want to talk about. Lisa Cook, Stephen Myron, is he going to go back to the White House? The renovations, for crying out loud, at the Eccles building. There's so much that doesn't include data that reporters want to ask about. Does that also cloud the picture for the chair?
I imagine that he is going to try at every turn to bring folks back to the conversation about data and reinforce the idea that the Fed is just moving along business as usual, not getting caught in the noise or the political football, and really just continuing to make data-informed decisions. Because for the Fed to be able to do their job and affect those longer-term interest rates, they really need to signal that they still have a steady hand at the till and that they are going to be making data-informed decisions that can then be relied on to move the markets in the ways that they're supposed to.
The Donald Trump's tariff policy is what's muddying the water, it feels like, even though there's been a bipartisan consensus that rate cuts is what this economy needs, even just a normalization of rates, if not ultimately stimulus. But if you look at the data, it feels like there's arguments to be made here that the U.S. has been able to absorb higher tariffs and higher rates, and it hasn't affected the end consumer in the way that maybe we thought of on April 2nd. Your thoughts? Is it?
You know, we have seen prices begin to rise. And one of the complicated things about the tariffs is twofold. One, just the chaos around what are tariffs, what will they be in 90 days, creates a lot of uncertainty that makes it difficult to invest. The other complicated thing about predicting when consumers would start to see price increases is that there's often a big lag on those tariffs. Companies place orders, retailers, for Christmas starting 6 months in advance, right? We have shipping times. We did see a pullback around Liberation Day, and then we saw that filter into prices over the following months. At the time, many analysts were saying, you have to watch and wait, and we are seeing those prices go up. As you said, I do think there has been a lot of strong indication that the Fed should have begun normalizing rates a lot sooner. I was on this show almost 2 years ago arguing that housing prices and mortgage prices were really weighing on consumers, and that the inflationary period from the pandemic supply chain shocks had largely worked its way through. And I do think that you're right that Trump's tariff policies have made it more difficult for the Fed to engage in the kind of rate cutting that many people were advocating for.
But if there's a time for prices to go up for the American consumer, is this the right time? And I say that with the caveat of we're still sitting on COVID-era stimulus. We're still sitting on elevated savings as kind of the broad American consumer. Retirement savings are up. Loans aren't as much of a burden as they were, say, 3 years ago because so many people have paid off their debt. If there's a time for the American consumer to absorb tariff costs, is that now?
You know, I'd be very careful when thinking about things like retirement savings being up. It's true that people who have significant retirement portfolios have seen asset prices rise dramatically. Also, people who already own a home have seen those asset prices rise dramatically. That has driven up wealth for people who have substantial holdings in the stock market and own a home. That is not the majority of Americans. And so I think working people are really being squeezed. Now they're being squeezed on both ends by a faltering labor market and rising prices. And those consumer goods prices and things like groceries and housing costs, those are a big part of the typical family's budget, less so the kind of folks who are seeing those asset prices appreciate and seeing their wealth go up.
Great to have you with us, Kitty. Just to be clear, you're expecting a quarter point tomorrow, right?
That's what the market seemed to be predicting.
Sure, great. To think you've been coming back for 2 years. It's wonderful, as always, to spend time with Kitty Richards, Senior Strategic Advisor, Groundwork Collaborative, former Treasury official in the Biden administration. Keep this conversation in mind right around this time tomorrow as we're waiting for the headlines to roll on interest rates and waiting for the news conference to begin. We'll have special Fed coverage 1:30 p.m. Eastern time right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. One of the other major stories that we've been following in the past 2 days is a potential sale of TikTok. This came out of nowhere, but based on talks that were had in Europe over the weekend with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, there appears to be, as we discussed yesterday, a framework in place. How that framework is going to work and whether it becomes an actual deal is a whole other matter. President Trump was asked about this by reporters in the driveway of the White House as he was leaving this morning for the UK. Let's listen to what he said.
We have a deal on TikTok. I've reached a deal with China. I'm going to speak to President Xi on Friday to confirm everything up. We made a very good trade deal, and I hope good for both countries, but a very different deal than they've made in the past.
What companies are going to buy
We'll be announcing that. We have a group of very big companies that want to buy it.
A group of very big companies want to buy it. Will China sign off? And will this meet the letter of the law? We have a law here that the president of the United States had signed after Congress passed this. Remember, divest or ban TikTok. No one knows more about this story than Mathieu Schettenhelm, and I'm really glad to say that he's here right now. From Bloomberg Intelligence, he's an analyst, media, telecom, litigation, and policy, so keep the legal aspect in mind here. Mr. Schettenhelm, great to see you.
Hi, Joe.
Where to begin? We talked a lot about this law as it was being debated. It was passed and it is now in place. As we understand any of the details of this framework that would reportedly include a licensing of the algorithm, would this fulfill the law?
Yeah, that's the big question. I mean, this has been an unusual path from the beginning. This isn't the way the law usually works.
Yeah.
You know, this law said that as of January 19th, TikTok is banned, right, and companies can't continue to carry it in their app stores after January 19th. It's
technically banned right now.
It's technically banned. That law is on the books. And yet President Trump every 3 months grants this extension. His Department of Justice has written these letters to the company saying you're not violating the law, although it's not clear how they're not violating the law. And so now the question is, if we have a deal, does the deal honor the terms? Because Congress was pretty specific about what sort of divestiture it envisioned. And as you said, one of those terms goes to the algorithm. And the law says that there should be no operational relationship between ByteDance and this new entity going forward with respect to the algorithm. And so that's going to be the big question to watch is how are they, does law matter, first of all, is the big question here. But if law still matters, how are they going to address that?
Are there enforcement mechanisms here?
Yeah, so the law contemplates that the Department of Justice can bring a suit against these companies that host. So that has really been, you know, the hang up here is President Trump has said, look, it's up to me, my Department of Justice, to enforce the law. I'm not going to enforce it. Lawsuits can be filed as well, in theory, you know, trying to push to say, look, you're not honoring the law. You could envision competitors of TikTok trying to do that, but if they wanted to do that, you would think they would have done it in these past 8 months, and we saw nothing there. And you know, there was a real passion about going after TikTok in 2023, 2024. A lot of that political courage has melted away. I'm not sure there's a lot of will from TikTok's competitors to raise the ire of President Trump with the lawsuits.
See, you know about politics too, not just the legal side of things. With the potential buyers, let's say there's a consortium. I'm assuming Larry Ellison is part of this, but we'll find out. Would they then also have to be vetted by the Chinese government, because Beijing still needs to sign off on?
Yeah, I mean, it's not clear, you know, how much China needs to be involved. Clearly, that's been a hang-up of a resolution here, is China signing off on how is this valuable algorithm going to be handled, who's going to handle it, where's this data going to go, where is it going to operate. So the devil is very much in the details on all of that, and it remains to be seen. Our law, the U.S. law, contemplates that the president should determine that this arrangement satisfies the law. Yeah, right. And so there's even a legal question there. If it's the president's determination, can he say whatever, you know, yes.
And he's a fan.
Yes.
I never asked you, are you on TikTok?
I'm not.
That's the right answer if you're covering it, right? I guess,
yes.
Kriti, you from time to time? Is it on the phone?
I'm a member of the youth. I have
to. I don't really? Okay, show me how someday. We'll do that in the meantime and meet you back here at 5 p.m. Eastern. Mathieu, Schettenhelm, Bloomberg Intelligence, thank you. The late edition of Balance of Power, 5 o'clock. See you then.